we're going to talk about the literature review section of the paper a little bit. The literature review can be really complicated, especially for students that aren't familiar with going and finding peer-reviewed academic research in journals. And it's also a step that takes a lot longer than sort of the output will look like. It takes a lot of searching and research and studying versus actually sort of putting on paper. You're going to read 20 pages for every sentence you write, maybe. And so there's a lot that goes on in the background, but that'll all show through in sort of the quality of the final paper. And so I talk about how to do this in chapter 3 of the book. Here under writing research, I give a description of the literature review. I give you sort of a short look at a literature review that was written. And so it can be really useful to look back at the book and read over this section. And the sort of overarching question that should be motivating in a literature review is just, what does research know about my subject? And so the subject of this paper that I'm writing is on spending for space exploration. Specifically, the variable is, does the person think we spend too little on space exploration? But the subject, the topic is sort of bigger. It's always at a different level. And so it's generally about public support for space exploration, of which spending is sort of one aspect. And so there's a lot of different sort of angles I can take in looking for existing literature. I'm not expecting there to be a paper with my exact dependent variable. And that's in part because when we're doing new research, we want to be making a contribution. We want to be the first person using our sort of specific model for the first time. But I want to look at related things because I'm not the first person to study spending in space or public support for space spending, or at a broader level, sort of public support for government spending. And so I want to sort of ground my paper in that literature and explain to my reader that I'm not the first person to look at this. Here's what we know. And that builds out why whatever I'm doing is new. And so where you should start, the first sort of rule of writing this literature review is that you should find the articles that you cite on Google Scholar. Before, in the first video for the introduction, I was just looking on Google because I was okay just using Google to find sort of general interest articles and pieces that talk about my subject, right? The growth of Space Force and changes in spending, to situate the reader. But in the literature review, I want to specifically lean on academic sources. And I want to find the sort of easiest way to know if it's an academic source or not is to find it on Google Scholar. And so Google Scholar will work the same way as Google. You can give it search terms and it'll return you results, of course. And it's got a couple other features that'll be really useful that we'll talk about in this video. And it'll take some time. Your first search might not turn up the exact papers you want. The search terms might be too broad. It may take some time to figure out exactly how you want to search. And so we'll work on honing in this video together. So I'll start by just Googling spending on space. And we could take a look at sort of the results that Google Scholar gives me immediately. Right, it's taking these search terms, spending and space. Right, this doesn't have to do with space, it has to do with fiscal space. That's just the use of the word, fiscal space and government spending. Right, these aren't even about actual space. Green space, fiscal space. I don't even know what fiscal space is. Okay, so let's get a little bit more specific then. Right, so that search didn't turn up what I wanted. Government spending on space, that's getting the same things. Government spending on space exploration, getting a little bit closer, right? Effective wording on public support for government spending. Maybe space exploration is a part of that article or one of the things they look at. Government spending on environmental protection, Government spending, okay. Public opinion perceptions of U.S. human space flight. That might be promising. So I'll open that in another tab and save it. Let's keep looking though. So what if I add NASA to the search? There we go. Public opinion and spending on NASA, explaining public support for space exploration, funding in America. These are the articles that I really want. And so let's open this and take a quick look, right? And so Google Scholar is going to take me to the article's homepage, which will give me the abstract. And so I can read this abstract and see if this paper is relevant to my topic. So the abstract's talking about related literature, and now they're going to expand it into space, and they find that people like space but don't want to spend too much on it. That is related to my paper, right? This is on space exploration and public support for it. And so what I'll want to do is summarize this article in a few sentences, right? What does this tell me? How does this help me to understand the paper that I'm writing, the study that I'm doing? How does this help me to build expectations? So I want to read the entire paper of this, but for now I'm just going to save it. And so I'm going to click my Zotero extension. It's going to go in, and now I've got a record of it saved. Let me go back and look at this one. Right, this is about support for government spending. It's using the General Social Survey, which we're using. It looks at individual predictors for support for spending in space. White male baby boomers are more likely to want to spend more on space. Right, this paper is really closely aligned with what I do. So I'm definitely going to want to summarize it. I'll save it, and I'll come back to it later. If I can't find a copy of the paper, so I can open, let me see if this takes me to, right, so sometimes Google Scholar will have the whole article available for you, so I don't have to search the library. If it didn't, I could go to the school's library and see if they have a copy. One thing that Google Scholar allows you to do is find related papers. And so this paper seems really closely aligned with what I'm doing. And so if a paper cites it, it's probably working on something related in the same way that I'm going to cite it and my paper is related to it. And so I'm going to go here to cited by, and this is going to pull up the 21 articles that have cited that paper, which is really close to mine. And so now this is 21 papers that are probably close to what I'm doing. So I can go through these and pick out a few more that I want to cite for my article. This one's just broadly about space policy. This one's about deep space planetary encounters, partisan rationales for space. That's related to what I'm looking at. Right, this one is probably going to be useful. And so I would continue to go through, and I would want to read more than just sort of the minimum. I could look for just sort of the closest articles, but I might want to read more broadly. And then what I would do is I would come into my document, and I would start to build out notes about what all of these are finding. You can often find the abstract should be a good enough summary for you to figure out what the article is going to argue. I want to go back and read the whole article, but it can generally give you enough of an idea. And so I can make a note about this one. Nadu finds that white, male, older Americans more likely to support spending on space exploration. Right, and I would do this for 5 or 6 different articles going into the section. right? I would want to try to find one that might find something similar, right? Similarly, someone argues, right, white males more likely. Or I might find one that has a different finding. In contrast, someone finds the opposite, right? And so I would pull together some of the more relevant articles in this subject area and build out this almost history of what researchers have found on this subject. And then that builds in to what I'm going to do. I'm going to show something new, unique about this subject area that builds upon what other scholars have done, but is also adding something unique to the story. And so that's what goes into the literature review. And here I can use Zotero to add a citation for this. That is now cited, and it's entered in my bibliography at the end, so I don't even have to worry about that at the end. And so this is going to take more time than I can do in sort of 12 minutes with you, because I'm going to have to fill in these sentences and actually add in citations and read through these articles. But this is the general structure of how I would write out a literature review. And so it's not going to be more than a few paragraphs, but it's going to contain a lot of really good information that scholars have published in peer-reviewed research in the past.